state. Why?
No, I didn't quite refer to as a forgotten state. I was referring to as an excluded. The Northeast has been excluded. And I have worked as a student of social science for so long, for more than three decades. So whatever the tools, the theoretical perspective and the studies on colonial and post-colonial debate, I could sense why the Northeast has been sort of excluded from the imagination of the nation. I call it Rashtra Chetna, the national consciousness is excluded. That was the word I was using it. And that's why the presidential speech, there is no Manipur. And as you understand, presidential speech is all about the policy statement of the government, what they have done, what they are doing, and what they intend to do in the days to come. That's a kind of a platform. And not mentioning Manipur in such a important speech, which is actually drafted by the government, tells you quite a lot about how they look at the issue in Manipur.
You also specifically stated that colonialism is a state of mind. So why did you use that in context of?
That's the same thing I said. There is a particular understanding among many social science students that there is a continuity between the colonial and the post-colonial in South Asia. Take, for example, the government has introduced 3 new laws. We have been guided. IPC is 1860. It was drafted by the British. And we continue to practice that. That's the continuity that many scholars have pointed it out. So not only the institutional mechanism and practices that we have, which we borrowed from the time of the colonial period, but more importantly, as I quoted Professor Ashish Nande, with whom I work while I was a faculty at CSTS, he would remind us that this is not only merely about the practices and institutions, but it is also colonialism is a psychology. It inverts sort of the value system and the belief system. And it's a state of mind, the way you look at the world, you look at ourselves. These are ideas and concepts which is rooted in that period, and we continue to have that one. This is a known argument about, that's what this present government talks so much about, decolonization of our mind and practices. Even similarly, they have built a new parliament house to decolonize ourselves. But since it is a state of mind, that slips through all the time. The way in which they look at the Northeast, of which Manipur is a part of that, the exclusion is rooted in that kind of a colonial perspective. That's what I was reminding.
In hindsight, why has Manipur as a state and the government in Manipur failed to control the violence?
My suspicion is that there is no proper functioning of the constitutional scheme of things. Right from the day one, the state government's autonomy seems to have been subverted by placing a security advisor who took charge of a very important arrangement called Unified Headquarters to coordinate different security forces, the central police organizations, the paramilitary forces, the regular army, as well as the state police forces, So that is the kind of arrangement that we have called Unified Headquarters, which is commonly referred to as Unified Command, which takes care of, according to its mandate, law and order and security scenario in the state. And that chairman was taken over by this gentleman called Kuldeep. And now that the cabinet minister of Manipur, which we knew right from the day one, but now there is you can call it a confession by a cabinet minister in the state government, who says that we appointed him, center has appointed him. But the problem is that it was done not through de jure form. It was a de facto imposition of the will of the union government, because the order was issued by the state government through the governor, his appointment. So we don't know who is in charge of it. So before I decided to join politics or electoral politics, I have been saying in many of my interviews, I said, who is in charge of Manipur? Is it the union government or the state government? Even I have called it the state government is a proxy.
So are you saying that Biren Singh is not?
So what I'm saying is that but the interesting part, or the saddest part in the other side, is the chief minister has been a willing partner to this subversion of the federal structure. He should have stood up by saying that law and order is a state subject, and I should take the call here, He didn't do it. That's why you can see many examples. He ordered something, the Assam Rifle didn't follow. He ordered something, CRPF didn't follow something. The police is not completely under his command, it seems, because whatever happens in the Churachampur area, I doubt whether it is completely under his control. So he has been subverted, but he is part of the subversion of the constitutional mechanism. I think he is protecting, in some sense, Mr. Modi and Amit Shah. If you remove this facade, state government, in the last 1 year, what would have happened is the entire responsibility would have come to the central government, and then before the election, there would have been, I suppose, on hindsight, would have been bad for the BJP, because the Modi ji and Amit Shah ji would be. So I think Biren Singh become a very convenient scapegoat, and he was a convenient and I think tool. And unfortunately, instead of standing up for his state and autonomy of the state, he was an obedient, if subservient is too strong an expression in the whole game. I think that's the thing we've seen it.
You refer to Assam Rifle. In last couple of months, there have been instances that Assam Rifles and the Manipur police commandos have been at loggerheads. There have been videos, viral videos. You have Mehra Paibi stopping the cavalcade of Assam Rifles, and we have seen videos where Manipur commandos in past and Assam Rifles were standing face to face. So what is the reason of this mistrust? Why is this happening?
No, I think before looking at the mistrust, what we need to understand is this is exactly the kind of failure of governance, the coordination among different agencies of the state. Manipur police and Assam Rifles cannot be seen as enemies to each other. After all, they are part of the Indian state, right? One is a state force, one is a paramilitary force which is dedicated to the northeast. So that this lack of coordination, there's people who are in charge of the situation, to begin with the Home Minister, which is Mr. Biren, whatever his remnant power that he has as a State Chief Minister and Home Minister, Mr. Kuldip Singh. It speaks of them, their failure to coordinate these agencies, and the commanding officers of these troops and officers in charge of the Manipur police. They should have resolved among themselves. So this utter lack of coordination has led to this tragedies in Manipur. That is the first thing, rather than looking at which force is on which side, because you will be trapped in the binary narrative then. What we as citizens of the country who love the Constitution should have been worried about this failure of constitutional mechanisms and state agencies not sync and coordinate properly to deal with this. That's the first thing that I must answer. The second aspect which is implicated is, both, Assam Rifle, to my mind, is almost like a local force, because its men, excepting the officers who are commanding, which is deputed from the army, all these people are recruited from the regions majorly. So what happened is that, and they have been stationed there for, I suspected they develop a kind of a vested institutional, interest like local police. So when the local crisis happen, they get entangled into that kind of a conflict. I think one of the best way to deal is to revamp. For the moment, I also hold very firmly that regular army should come in, and other trusted CRPF or BSF kind of force to take charge. And I think Assam Rifles should take a step back for the moment and take care of itself, because I think, and Manipur police must also be revamped. You cannot afford to communalize state agencies and institutions. I think that's a danger for the country.
So, were civil society organizations historically very powerful in Manipur, or they have become powerful in the context of last 1.5 years of violence? Whether they belong to the cookies or they belong to the
Nagas, I think the interesting, Kartikeya, you have been covering this almost from the day one you have been doing this. You must notice that the traditional civil society organizations have been very active, traditionally speaking, and those traditional organizations were not the only prominent groups from within, quote, the civil society sphere. There are a lot of other new groups come in. ITLF, for example, you haven't heard about it before. CO2, you haven't heard about it. So like this, a new dynamics have happened. I think one of the indication is the emergence of forces in the sphere of civil society, not the traditional ones which used to be very active. I think that is the marker of this conflict as well. I mean, any observer would have seen what forces behind these new, forces.
I mean to say, I've got more press releases from civil society actors than from the police or the army or the chief minister's office.
That's the
or the
saddest part also.
I have got press releases and representation from people who claim that they represent a community or a melange of smaller communities.
Kartikeya, that is also the manifestation of the failure or the retreat of the state. That's what I've been referring to. It has become an Hobbesian war, a statelessness. And you are speaking exactly that. If some crime has happened, what you expect is that you can have a dedicated police officer who brief, because this is a crisis. So maybe you have a dedicated police officer in the rank of a DIG or an IGP who brief on an every day about what had happened and what the state is doing. The voice of the state should have heard. What happened is that the state has abandoned it. So there is a vacuum in the information space as well, which has been taken over by propagandists and vested interests and twisted the narrative, because the state has withdrawn. And I think this crisis is unprecedented for one particular region. The major region is the retreat, you call it, retreat of the state, or the absence of the state, or you can almost call it, it's a statelessness. So I think what you are remarking is exactly that. There is no police officers clarifying things, there is no civil authority clarifying things, there is no home minister making a statement or a chief minister making a statement. Even the propaganda that you see here about painting one community as a demon and demonize one community, and one is presented as a sole victim, forgetting that there are perpetrators and victims on both sides.
Correct.
And these things could have been corrected had there been an information officer sitting here in Delhi and try to counter this. Complete silence. There are false information on forests, on populations and so forth, on drugs. A lot of things have been said, and I think the state should have come much more prominently by putting an information officer. These propaganda could have also been sort of stopped in that sense. So overall absence is the same reflection
I get your point. Earlier when
state.
it started, Maitis were seen as perpetrators and the cookies were seen as victims.
I mean, right now,
was there.
No, even today, though it is slowly changing. How ethnic cleansing was so mindlessly used by politicians within hours. And I've seen one scholar writing in the national newspapers using this term, whether it was an appropriate expression in the first 48 hours or not. I mean, they don't even care.
But the same attention has not been given to Jiribam, where a particular community has been moved out. A lot of Meitei resident population has to shift from Jiribam.
That was the same thing. The fact people have forgotten, the violence started in Churachandpur. And its adjoining areas in Torbung and Ets. It's not in Imphal. And its adjoining areas in Torbung and Ets. It's not in Imphal. Imphal was a reactions to that one in the afternoon. In the late afternoon started. Everybody can check it. We've forgotten, and then Meiteis have been shifted out from many of these, and from the heart of the Churachandpur. After the population have been shifted, the colonies have been flattened. I mean, and then people get confused. This particular act is equated with people, riots, vandalizing houses in colonies. This is something very different. That entire colonies have been flattened. In Imphal, for example, you go, send anybody. For a long time, they said there is no cookie. It's only around 3rd September. The last group of cookies were shifted out of Imphal. But all along for 4 months, people have been saying that there is no cookie in Imphal. Just to fit into narrative, there is no cookie in the valley, there is no Meiteis in no, let me complete this. So there is kind of a narrative. It is not that people have not been killed. It is not that cookies not have been killed in Imphal. Lot of innocent lives have been lost in the first 48 hours or so. Then there was a complete state failure on that part. But people have conflated narratives, how the violence started. People said there was a gate they said destroyed. It was not destroyed. It was vandalized. There was, obviously. But was it a good enough reasons to burn houses and start killing each other? You realize that. And if the government has been alerted to these things, they could have stopped. And those innocent lives in Imphal should have been saved. But they didn't do it. So there is a series of failure of the state. But rather than looking at these processes, there's a narrative about Maitai started, genocide, minority, this kind of a framing which is familiar to the rest of the world to generate sympathy. And then some started calling your own fellow citizens all kinds of names. It is unacceptable to me. So my target has been, the state should have, I said, my first interview on national media, I said, the state should have cracked down there. There should have been no violence in Imphal. And they should have controlled this violence we started. But then you start this whole narrative about victim and perpetrators.
The first draft of history is already out, which is journalism. In hindsight, you also as a practicing sociologist, why did the violence take place in Manipur? Why did it erupt? Why did it take people by surprise? So there's nothing, are we supposed to believe that the violence can be spontaneous?
No, I think, Kartikeya, social science students are often seen like an astrologer or something. We are not. We do our analysis. On 22nd of August, 2015, way back, more than 8-9 years ago, I wrote, at the height of that crisis in 2015 in Churachandpur, I said, this is a warning sign. I said, once the class happen at the community level, there will be shifting of population and spatial reorganizations. Once that particular thing happen, it will be very difficult to reverse back. I said it is not impossible, but I said it will be very. This I have written on 22nd of August 2015, almost now 9 years ago. So for me, it didn't come as a surprise, first of all, because there has been tension has been.
What did you pick up in 2015? What did you pick up?
This, because there was a crisis in Churachandpur, 9 people died, and I know there has been a narrative about Zalingam and Kuki state, and that kind of a tendency is already there. And I think that the state should have responded and deal with it in a much more effective manner, rather than being brash and crash, style. A state should have been more responsible and then control this violence, address certain grievances. So these are some of the track that I have observed. And the anger among the Maitais have been building it up. There has been usurping, changing names. The place has been happening for 2 or 3 years. On Kaubru, Lamka, before that, Kaubru, all these things. So there have been things which have been growing up, and there is also an element of radicalization in the valley, which I can see. So I think it is building up for some time. So to my mind, to me, it did not come as a surprise at all. But what surprises me is the way in which the Indian state has allowed this thing to linger on. And I could catch those traces from the last week of May onwards. I said, there is something more to this, not simply all these factors. And that result has shown in front of us for 14 months. We have not resolved. This kind of crisis has never happened before, despite their false comparison with 1993.
How would you describe Arambai Tengol?
This is, I think it came off as an organization. I think I haven't heard of his name for before at all. I am more familiar with other CSOs and so on. Right? So they came up, and they are also one of the civil society which became prominent during this crisis, rather than the other traditional organizations. That these are the interesting phenomena that you should, any observer of Manipur should know. The traditional civil society has sort of taken a little backward. There are reasons for that. It will be too long for me to speak here. But new civil society space has been occupied by other forces.
But there is also let's see from a different vantage point, there is also a cookie grouse that there is a narrative against them that they are poppy cultivators, they invite all the infiltrators, they are the destroyers of the forest. They are all of them are being labeled as foreigners, which is incorrect.
That I've said, see, what happened is, if you remember, this is something that I've said in one of my first public speech on this crisis in Jantar Mantar. I said, don't blame the entire community, blame the elites and their divisive politics. That is my word. You can't demonize the entire community. And I have also said that I don't want to call my own fellow citizens as foreigners in one of those interviews. So, but the fact remains, where this poppy cultivation is happening, it has increased over the period of time. So it is a serious issue for us to deal with it. And I was told by one of the people, it is in a conversation that I had with people on the ground, they said 60,000 crores, the drug business in this state. This is more than the state budgets annually. So drug and poppy cultivation is a serious issue in Manipur. Nobody should deny that. Nobody should justify it in the name of communities and so on. So I think that is happening in these hilly regions or highlands in Manipur. And many of these places happen to be areas dominated or populated by these tribes. So there is a kind of uncanny associations, but by this you should not blame the entire community. But the fact remains, the poppy cultivation is an issue because it not only creates serious implication in socio-economic and political life. Colombia is one example, Afghanistan is one example. When that kind of a thing happens, entire fabric of the society gets distorted. So it's a serious issue that we must address it, irrespective of this conflict. The other issues of the illegal immigrants,
yes.
This has been a porous border, and it is a legacy issues. It's not to be blamed on one X party or Y party. How the subcontinents were sort of organized, how nation state came into being in this part. So the whole European idea of a very bounded identities were not. Till 1965, Bengal borders was porous as well as the western sectors. We all know this. And Manipur side is a much more difficult terrain in that sense. So border has remained porous and there has been movement of people back and forth. But what happened is the idea of nation state consolidates, then these movements are sought to be restricted, and there is a rationale as a nation state that you must distinguish between citizens and non-citizens. But unfortunately, among these cookie groups, it was quoted in one of these articles I have often shared as, one gentleman was quoted as saying that why should we believe in this national boundary? It's created by the British. The other side has the same ethnicity as ours. And so, that gives a false a wrong message that you are justifying people coming from Myanmar as your own citizen, you should be accepted kind of thing. That gives a false thing. The last one is you should also remember that there are economic dynamics. You get more benefit on the Indian side, in Burma or Myanmar in comparison. So there is a pull factor. Though I will not deny that there could be infiltrations and settling of illegal immigrants because of all these factors, and one should be able to distinguish who is a citizen and who is not. And when you deal with that, it should be dealt according to national and internationally established norms and standards. I'm clear on this, but there is a need to distinguish between citizens and non-citizens. By this again, do not blame a particular community as full of illegal immigrations. And if you dig it up, then many of us can also be implicated. But I have no doubt that these forces, this flow of population, it needs to be.
Has it altered the demography in Manipur?
No, my suspicion is all the papers that I read seems to suggest that there is a unnatural within quote, but which needs to further investigation, which I'm doing it with people from not only from the state of Manipur, from outside, demographers and others. I'm trying to analyze it myself also now, so that. But whatever literature that I have seen, there is an indication that there is an increase in populations, which possibly accounted by this infiltration.
How do you break a deadlock? Because there are two things. One, there is a lack of movement of people of different communities in different areas. Mm-hmm. It's like a sort of volunteer lock has been created, and there are guns which are there on both sides. And then there is this anxiety because one side is saying either separate administration on union territory, which is about the territorial integrity of Manipur.
You know, that is surprising part. As I said, I see it as either a politically motivated argument that you started using this phrase called ethnic cleansing, genocide from the day one to describe an event which tells you something else. In fact, the ethnic cleansing had to happen. It happened in Churachampur before anything else. If you look at the UN definition of it, but that was much later. But the initial period, within 48 hours, throwing up terms like genocide and ethnic cleansing, I think it sounds like a premeditated, script that one is pronouncing it. Along with that, rather than appealing to the people to maintain calm, which is what the politicians are expected, or responsible scholars are expected, and then ask the state to take charge of the situations, one started talking about separate administrations right from the first week itself, almost.
Yes.
And then started hammering it, there is no cookie, there is no, because that fits in the narrative of this particular political.
Are you saying that it was programmed?
I said it already. It sounds to me like a premeditated statement. And that is why I said that don't blame the cookies as a community, but blame their elites and this divisive politics, which I said has been going on for a long, long time. But that has a historical reasons. There are political, economic grievances that the state should have addressed, not now, long time back. There are genuine grievances or a perceived injustice, a real or perceived. You should have been able to address it. That's what a responsible government is supposed to do. You know what I meant. And therefore, allowing this, leaving the narrative free for the others to occupy, state withdrawing from the information space, from the maintenance of law and order, all these things have happened. So unnecessarily you started blaming the entire community or the Meiteis as well. One event happened, you started calling rapist Meiteis and this or that. We should have cracked down, but unfortunately, the voice of regions, I'm saying this with all the implications, I would have expected some of these MLAs, rather than asking for separate administrations and throwing up terms like ethnic cleansing and genocide within 48 hours or 1 week, they should have asked for peace and peace to be maintained and try to negotiate. In Kuki Naga class in 1990s, the MLAs worked together, Nagas and Kukis. But they didn't do it. So that makes me sense that since I knew that this particular identity project has been going on for a long time, I suspected. And unfortunately, in AC, what happened, there are a series of things. In More in 2015 or 16, Meiteis were killed. But civil society group made, politician made, and that things was resolved. But that is the time when I said, your anger, you are just, people are waiting for you to snap your anger one day and have a class, then reorganization of population and spaces. And by that time, it will be very difficult. That was a warning I wrote on 22nd August 2015, 9 years ago, 8 years ago before this crisis happened.
But then how do you get a state back to power which is so militarized now? I'm sure you have probably more stolen weapons in Manipur than any other state.
Yeah, that's what I said, retreat of the state. You know what state is, as Weber says, it claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. When the state is not able to monopolize that violence, it is what we call it a failed state. Where the warlords will run in Afghanistan, for example. So I think that was what initial part I can understand. People were angry, their villages have been attacked, so obviously people will react and so on, either side. But to allow it to linger on for so long, and that's where I call it, this inaction is a sign of complicity of the Indian state. You understand what I'm saying? Otherwise, in India, I have never seen, or for that matter, except for some banana republic, the state wouldn't allow this kind of, challenge to their monopoly over the physical force.
But there is also an absence of an individual initiative. I'll give you an example. When you can disagree, it's like Gandhi in Noakhali. I mean, there is no powerful initiative in context of conversation, healing.
You're reminding of Nawakali was one of the poignant moments in the partition stories. Gandhi going there and saying, "I will fast till date if you don't stop this violence," kind of thing.
Because as a student stayed with me.
No. I'm saying that that kind of Gandhi kind of a leaders is once in a lifetime sort of a person. You don't encounter that. I don't think Manipur has that kind of a person to appeal. The only authority you could have expected is the government, because people respect government, but the government has lost that trust from both the communities majorly. You see, Man Ki Baat, some people destroying the radio long time back. So even among the Meiteis. But the narrative is that Meiteis are supporting this government. And they are calling this is a Meitei government, despite the fact that there are cookie cabinet ministers inside it. This kind of twisted narrative has been allowed to go on.
You would recall that last time when the session was called, there is a controversial aspect of the session that, it was so small and then it didn't run its course. The cookie MLAs didn't come. So there is within the lawmakers.
Yeah, that's I know you're referring to that few minutes or hours assembly.
Whatever it was, they didn't come.
Yeah, that's what I said but they are comparing with 1993, which is wrong. In that time, Kuki MLAs and Naga MLAs worked together. Gaikhangam could visit Kangpokpi, our CWC member, senior Congress leader. Today, I cannot accompany Rahulji to Churachampur. And none of these people, Kuki MLAs can come here. That kind of a scenario. And they don't even meet cabinet ministers and assemblies. So there's something drastically different this time. But, they're trying to cover up by saying that this is the same as 1993, usme ye hua, wo hua kind of thing. I think it is an excuse and trying to bluff the people. We have a crisis, Kartikeya. Irrespective of the party politics, India is not a banana republic. Why would you allow these things to happen for so long?
So is it an ethnic crisis? Is it a national security issue, if I frame it from the perspective of foreign militants, instability in Myanmar, drug cultivation, golden triangle? Or is it a crisis, as you said, the retreat of the state? How do you frame Manipur violence, which has not subsided in last 1.5 years?
I think, when you do an analysis, and there is something what I like this French philosopher, Michel Foucault, who often says, our engagement with the present casts a shadow in the past. So when you look at the present crisis, it necessarily with respect some of the issues in the past. So all these issues that you are talking about, porous border, migration, illegal migrations, and then deforestation, poppy cultures, armed conflict, armed conflict, including the Indian state counterinsurgency measures. You understand, failure of governance, and not addressing people's grievances for a long time. All of them gets implicated. Drugs, armed conflict, corruptions, political class not able to deal with the genuine issues of the people, all gets entangled. And these elements are nurtured by what I will call it a continuity between the colonial and the post-colonial, both in terms of the discourses and practices. And that's how this is a complex manifestation of these factors. And what should have been done is, immediacy of the violence, what you expect the state to respond, did not respond. So it has been allowed. All these complex issues require a very takeful visions to deal with it, not some arrogant, brass, main dikha dunga kind of thing. No, you can't do that. It will burst. It's like an embedded bullet in your body, or in Manipuri we call it a singsep. You put something and it has become a part of the body for a long time. But you want to pluck it suddenly, people will die, blood will come out. So there are ways to take it meticulous planning how to take this bullet out or this piece of wood embedded in the body, which has almost like become a part of the body. And that required a vision and tactfulness and maturity of political leadership. And that is absolutely absent in the present crisis.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
taking time for us. Thank you.
Hey, careful, huh? My daddy got it from abroad. Hey, disaster! How will you pay for the loss now?
In stock market, you should take risk